Good morning, and welcome to another episode of BitThink with me, Christina. Remember, if you like this video or you like any of the other videos on my channel, subscribe and hit the notification button. So this morning I wanted to talk about a couple of things that have been repetitively on my mind in an annoying and I very much disagree with personally kind of way. The first one has to do with level playing fields. And here I found a great picture of what is clearly not a level playing field. This relates to the move, particularly in the United States and in the West, to impose the concept of an accredited investor onto the ICO and or the crypto space. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about what I understand to be the reasons generally put forward as to why the concept of an accredited investor is a good idea, and to also share a few of my own thoughts about why I think it is such a bad idea in the aggregate and in the long run. As you can imagine, an unlevel playing field doesn't really ever lead to a very satisfying game, either for the players or the spectators. So the idea of an accredited investor, as we can see here in this super basic definition by Wikipedia, is a sophisticated investor and is generally a high net worth individual, a bank, a financial institution, large corporations who have access to complex and higher risk investments such as venture capital, hedge funds, and angel investments. And of course, there are various frameworks that are specific to various countries. But I think the underlying idea in all cases is the same. The idea being that somebody or some entity that has enough money to be stupid should be allowed to be stupid. Another way of saying that is, if you have enough money, you can afford to take risks and lose it, and therefore you should be allowed to participate in the things that are the highest risk and therefore have the highest possibility of bad outcome. Now, of course, the problem with this is that high risk also means high reward. And by structuring access to high risk or highly popular because they are initial forms of investment, whether those are IPOs, those are ICOs, those are initial debt offerings, whatever version of getting in on the ground floor, the idea needs to be considered seriously that the structure of an accredited investor absolutely perpetuates the advantage to those that already own wealth. Because by saying that only the rich are allowed to be dumb, you're also saying only the rich are allowed to benefit from taking the risk of potentially being dumb, but actually turning out to be not dumb. I am entirely against the idea of an overly nanny type of state or a regulatory framework that's driving mission is to protect people from their own stupidity, and I think more importantly, prevent people from complaining later about their own vulnerability to being scammed, their lack of education, their non-considered perspective on their assets and how they manage risk. I think one of the things that's really worth pointing out is that people who have less are in some cases better equipped to assess risk than those that have enough to play with and not worry about losing. I think that if you're in a situation where you are continually having to check your costs and monitor your income flow and make assessments about whether or not you're going to be able to pay for a bill coming up in September, given what you have to get through by way of this summer and so on. I mean, all of the quotidian elements that have to do with money management in many cases make people who are not full-blown accredited investors potentially more sophisticated at assessing risk. So whether one takes the perspective that the movement towards putting an accredited investor framework on top of the investment vehicles emerging from the crypto sphere. And whether one takes a perspective that goes something like it's a well-meaning, well-intentioned, and therefore laudable exercise in trying to prevent full-blown exploitation of those people who don't even know that there are people who exploit and are vulnerable to making really bad decisions, and that's a good thing. Or one takes a perspective that says this is simply the extension of a structural advantage to those who already have the assets that has been going on for sure from a time immemorial, but certainly is very reminiscent of the kind of IPO venture capitalist model that emerged through the dot-com experience. I mean, whatever perspective one takes on it, I think it's fair to say that the future could well be colonized by entities that find ways through whether it's special purpose vehicles or its other kind of frameworks, entities that find ways to allow individual, non-accredited, not rich people to aggregate together to continue to participate in the bonanza of potential returns that are available in the cryptosphere. So I've pulled up Bank to the Future's website here, and I think that this is a very interesting company. I think Simon Dixon is a remarkably gifted and articulate gentleman, and I think that one of the really interesting things about this entity, company, mind frame even, is, as he said, he's trying to occupy a middle space between full-blown traditional investing structures and regulatory submission and the alternative end of the spectrum, which is the entirely unregulated ICO universe. And the fact that they have even thought through the need to find ways to allow non-accredited individuals to participate in both their ICO and hopefully other projects that they invest in is, for me, a real competitive advantage that this company is starting to display. And I think that in terms of individuals in the community finding a way to push back against the continued sort of colonization of the accredited investor framework in the space, it would be to look to see how smaller investors, smaller traders, smaller gamblers can continue to participate. So in this context, I think it's worth also repeating, I think, a very widely held idea, and who knows if and when any kind of systemic program could ever be implemented, but there is a simple case to be made with regards to making all people educated enough to qualify as quote-unquote sophisticated. There's no question that school curricula all over the Western world spectacularly fail to educate young people in economic and financial basics as they apply in a contemporary context, much like grammar seems to be spectacularly lacking likewise all over the English-speaking world, that's for sure. But I do think that another way of potentially kind of pushing back is for a redefinition of accredited investor that has more to do with display of financial competency, regardless of what net worth happens to be. I think that if any kind of pressure or lobby group were to advocate a change or the creation of a new type of accreditation process in the crypto sphere, then you might be able to, for example, include people who, even though they might be wealthy in their own country, do not qualify with regards to, say, Western standards of wealth, but absolutely have perhaps a much more sophisticated understanding of what they're investing in than the people in, say, the investment banks or VC funds understand. So the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly this morning is the presumption of innocence. This is widely known. Most people have heard of it. It essentially means that the proposition is that you are innocent until someone else can prove that you are guilty. Here we see the Latin expression. Burden of proof is on the one who declares it, not on the one who denies it. This is clearly the case in criminal law. It's also the case in civil law. And if you even just sort of briefly scroll through the Wikipedia entry, it is clear that this concept that a person is to be treated as if innocent until proven to be guilty is something that goes back for as long as we've been writing down laws in other cultures. And we can see here in the entry, the Wikipedia points out to us that this right is so important in modern democracies, constitutional monarchies, and republics that many have explicitly included it in their legal codes and constitutions. Now, the reason why I bring this up, look, here we are in Iran, same thing. The reason why I bring this up is because we now absolutely live in a world where the presumption of innocence has been eroded to the point of not existing. Our money is absolutely treated as if it is guilty, and it is incumbent on all people to prove that their money is innocent. And I was prompted to think about this again by an article that an acquaintance that I know through Twitter brought to my attention. So I can't get this article to open at the time, but to summarize briefly, the author takes the position that government should ban all cryptocurrencies of all types because anyone can mine them. And there is no way of knowing whether or not somebody who is mining cryptocurrencies is doing it for ill-gotten gains, that they have a criminal intent with regards to any kind of income or profit they make, or that the monies that they use to set up to mine are in some way problematic. This whole article's thrust is that we should introduce the idea of know your miner, just like we have the idea of know your customer. If we combine this kind of inversion of the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, rather we presume that you may be guilty and therefore you must prove your innocence, with some of the completely eroded concepts of privacy, privacy being the right to choose who and when you declare whatever information it is that you believe to be private, which in most people's cases, most information about them. If we combine those two perversions in the way in which modern democracy and its thinking previously had been established, we can see that we live in a world in which the moment a person claims any kind of right to privacy or any kind of right to presumption of innocence, that itself is taken as an indication, a further indication of guilt. The idea goes something like, if you have nothing to hide, then you have no premise on which to exercise any discretion about who and what and where sees or knows whatever it is that you are declaring you are innocent with regards to. So one of the most basic forms of privacy that people have is the difference between their private, unspoken, unexpressed thoughts and their expressed thoughts through words or through actions. I would argue that the capacity to deceive, the capacity to gossip, the capacity to be human is actually predicated on the ability to have two states of being, that which is within your own head and that which is publicly available to others around you. And to a certain extent, I'm sure it goes to our capacity to develop theories of minds of other people based on a perception of our own experience of having a mind separate from the mind that expresses itself to others. So if we think about the ways in which privacy has been eroded as a right, and any kind of claim to exercise it has been taken to now be seen to be an indication of guilt, we realize that there are some seriously profound shifts that have occurred, I would argue, since 9/11 in the social fabric of the liberal, westernized democratic models.